Let's move on, though. And, Mark, we're going into our fantasy rankings yet again. Another thank you to Patrick for joining us. A great Bears topic. If you're on YouTube, you got to go check it out. A great Bears topic for Pat coming in, talking if they're overhyped. But we are looking at our tight end rankings, and we're almost to the end of our fantasy football rankings. We got tight ends this week. Then we've got the illustrious kicker episode next week.
Love it.
We're only doing top 16, though, next week. I don't want to kill myself going through the top 30 kickers because, let's be honest, if you carry 2 on your roster, something is loose up here, and you're basically tinfoil hat Ricky at that point if you've got 2 kickers. But let's get into the first part of our rankings, 21 through 30. Before I throw up the graphic, I have 2 honorable mentions, Clive Walford and Luke Wilson. Cracking some of the rankings, however, did not make it to the combined 30. But here is 21 through 30. Starting off at number 30, Jake Butt of the Denver Broncos. Right above him, 29, Nick Vannett of the Seattle Seahawks. Then Adam Shaheen of the Chicago Bears. Then Rico Gathers at 27, Dallas Cowboys. Austin Hooper at 26 of the Atlanta Falcons. Then Vernon Davis at number 25 of the Washington Redskins. Vance McDonald at 24, San Francisco 49er. This name I'm going to screw up, so Mark, you're going to help me out here. Miami Dolphin tight end Mike Gesicki. Is that how you say
it?
Gesicki. Miami Dolphin tight end right there at number 23. Ricky Seals-Jones at 22. And then Benjamin Watson, big old Ben Watt, right there for the Saints at 21. And the guy I want to start with first, there's a few guys I want to mention here. The guy I want to start with is, I actually had this guy in the top 20 of mine. You obviously had him between 21 and 30, and that's Vernon Davis. And the thing I just want to say about Vernon Davis off the start is he going to be the main tight end in Washington? No, that's Jordan Reed. Spoiler alert, he's in our top 10 for a reason. However, the thing that I think with Vernon Davis that'll help is that he is now getting a quarterback that really likes the tight end. And this will be a big year to where if we decide Alex Smith was the tight end thing because that's all Casey had most years, besides maybe Tyreek Hill, but he was more of an offensive weapon, you could say, than a wide receiver. Or will this be the Jordan Reed and Vernon Davis show as Alex Smith links in with those tight ends in Washington, D.C.?
And it's interesting because these two do have some history together as well.
Yeah, they're both on the 49ers.
Yeah. And those were some of Vernon Davis's,
better years.
I mean, we're pretty far removed from those almost 1,000-yard seasons that he had back-to-back. Now, the thing with Vernon Davis is he's 34 years old. So does the team start to limit some of his time on the field? In 2015, he had 29 targets again in 2000. That was 1 year in 2015. Part of it with Denver, part of it with San Francisco. 2016, he was back up with Washington at 59, 69. Not as much of the, when you're that number one guy, you're going to get closer to 80, 90, 100, if not more. That's going back to some of those old San Francisco days. But, like you said, Jordan Reed's that number one option. But the thing about Jordan Reed, sometimes injury might be an issue for Jordan Reed. So maybe Vernon Davis, a guy who injury hasn't been that big of an issue for Vernon Davis, maybe that does allow him to get more targets.
And let me throw this at you. Would you be and here's the thing that you got to think about in this ranking. Basically, everyone in my mind in the top 16, like when you get to this part of the ranking, tight end, wide receiver's a little different, running back's been different. This is kind of almost like the quarterback rankings. Anyone in our top 16 is basically us saying they could be your starter, depending on how deep your league is, if you have a 16-team league or less. Anyone below 16 to me is, this is a guy you could draft, but he's your backup tight end. He's a guy that maybe you're picking to be a flex spot in some weeks. He's going to compete for that, or he's a guy that, he's got a good bye week with the guy that you picked, so I'm going to go and pick him as the backup. As a backup tight end, would you be mad fantasy with 41 receptions, PPR, non-PPR, you take that into your own case, 41 receptions, just under 550 yards, 5 touchdowns.
I'm not upset, no.
That was the last season with Alex Smith in 2012 for San Fran.
Yeah, you're definitely not going to be upset with that with a guy who is essentially your backup tight end.
And I know that he also had Colin Kaepernick a little bit in that one too. I know 49er fans are going to jump on me for that.
And the other thing with that too is with it all depends on your strategy, because you mentioned the flex position. Some people are in a league where tight ends can be flex.
Yeah.
Other people are in a league where, no, a flex is a wide receiver or a running back.
I only say that because I know in ours, our personal one with most of the guys from MVP, we can use the tight end as a flex.
I think it's worth it because, it gives a reason to draft another one maybe. Because otherwise, you might be the person that goes, no, I got one tight end. That's good.
That's all I need.
I'll figure something out, in week whatever.
Whenever I need the bye, basically.
Yeah, I'll figure it out then. And tight ends are a difficult one, too, because there's always going to be that guy that's going to be a surprise because maybe the first guy goes down or maybe some of those, that offensive line is not as good as we would hope, and that way you got to get the ball out fast.
Yeah.
So some of these guys down here, these are prime people to target because of the fact that some of them might actually be top quality tight ends towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't get that start right away, but then they start to produce in week 5, 6, and beyond or something like that. So you definitely get some of that. And Vernon Davis, this is a household name for fantasy football fans out there years ago, but he's still always been that solid guy. He's a guy who gets drafted, and there's no reason why he shouldn't get drafted in this one as well. I just don't know because he's not the number one target. Alex Smith is new here, so there's some getting used to some things. The team is not that amazing compared to what he's had.
Which in my head, I mean, you look at, first off, and this is the last thing I'll say before we kind of move on to the next guy, one that you wanted to talk about, the wide receivers, Doxson, Crowder, Paul Richardson, those aren't guys that scream off the page at me. Yes, they're going to get their touches and could surprise me this year, but I think this is something that Alex Smith being new, he likes that safety blanket of the tight end. Jordan Reed will be the main, but you brought up injury. Hey, what if he gets injured? Vernon Davis is then the main go-to guy. I even think as a second tight end on this depth chart, Vernon Davis is going to get his. And with Alex Smith being new, he might go more to what he's safe with, what he is comfortable with, whether it's Jordan Reed, whether it's Vernon Davis. I might be a little high on him, but I think because of that, he's a top 20 tight end.
And a lot of it's going to depend for people what they actually feel about Alex Smith. Sean on
the ultimate game manager.
Yeah, doesn't like Alex Smith at all. And, a lot of people out there say that Alex Smith's success is very tied to his coach. Harbaugh.
Now he has Jay Gruden.
Now he's got Jay Gruden. He had Andy Reid, quarterback whisperer. So if you like Jay Gruden, if you don't like Jay Gruden is really what's going to decide whether you like a lot of things with the Washington Redskins.
Tell me about a guy that you wanted to talk about, Austin Hooper, with the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, Austin Hooper's an interesting one because he's that kind of guy where you're going to get a little surprised by him every now and then, and he's going to give you a lot of hope.
Like when he played the Bears last year?
Oh, killed it. I mean, I can't even imagine how many people went and immediately picked this guy up. And then you have the rest of it where, like, he's a boom or bust type of tight end. And that's why I have him in this bottom section of, you can try and play the matchups for him because he's on a great team. The Atlanta Falcons are a great team, but they've got so many weapons. He is number one on the
depth chart now.
Yep, he's number one on the depth chart for tight end, but there's so many weapons out there. Julio, they got Calvin Ridley now. You've got an amazing running back. So there's a lot to compete with, which is good and bad because that can help things out. I mean, obviously, Julio's going to get covered. He's going to get double coverage. Calvin Ridley might actually, depending on how he pans out, he might start to demand some attention as well.
And if this, and correct me if I'm wrong, if this Sarkisian offense really starts to click here in Atlanta, everyone's going to get touches. It's not just going to be the wide receivers, Sanu, Jones, and Ridley. Hooper's going to get his also. And like the question for me and why I put Hooper around where we had him at like 25 is, are we going to see, last year he got 65 targets, only 49 receptions. Are we going to see that kind of a similar number? Are we just going to see 65 targets, just over 500 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is almost a similar stat line to, like I said, for Vernon Davis. For a backup, that's not bad, but are we going to see a little bit more, maybe a few more yards, a few more red zone targets where maybe he has 5, 6 touchdowns instead of just 3?
Yeah, you certainly are going to hope so. I mean, this is a guy coming into his 3rd season, so this is the time where you really start to develop, and you're not necessarily going to always be at your prime here. That might be year 4, year 5, or something like that, where players really start to get the NFL. But this is a time where you should be turning it on. And you look at some of this, like, sure, he had a lot of games where he only had 2 targets. That's out there. Almost half of his games last season, he had 2 or less targets. But he also had quite a few where he had 7, 9, a lot of 6s and 5. So there are there are games where he is getting to be a big part of this offense. This offense had a lot of trouble, and I think coaching is part of it for sure. But I think that you should hopefully have learned, and the team did better when he got more involved in a lot of these games.
And one thing I do like with him, and this actually, he had a 5% increase in this from rookie year to last year, but he was a guy that was catching 75% of the balls thrown to him. And I mean, for me, I know we're in backup tight end range, but for a backup, hey, if you're going to catch 75%, if you're going to catch 3 of every 4 balls that are thrown your way, I'll take you as a backup, because it's one of those things where I look at it and I go, as long as you catch the ball and have that big playability. Like, there was one play against the Bears last year, I want to say, where he caught it and just went right up the sideline. And I think he went all the way for a touchdown, if not in the red zone, like 5-yard line. If you have that play, all you got to do is catch the ball, and you're a threat there. So, I mean, with Hooper, he does have a ton of weapons there. Is this Sarkisian offense really going to click year 2? Those are really the questions that I have for the Falcons as total, and why I have them kind of low on mine.
Yeah, and it's going to depend on a lot of that. I mean, when you're in this backup range, these guys don't get a ton of targets. They get their targets, but not a ton. So they have to be people who make the most of it. He's had plenty of games where he had a 20 or more yard reception. That's good. You hope for more of that. But now, of course, with being tight end number 1, hopefully, that should hopefully kind of, give him more opportunities.
Now, here's a guy I want to mention only because he's kind of in the similar footing as an Austin Hooper, but he is lower because he only had 15 targets last year. And that's Nick Vannett for me. Because the big thing why I put Vannett, I put him right at 28 in my rankings, is, yes, he only had 15 targets last year, but with the departure to Jimmy Graham in Seattle, Vannett's going to be the guy. He's a 3rd-year pro, going to be the guy in Seattle. Is he going to get his touches? Or should people basically like yourself, you didn't have Vannett anywhere near your top 30. Is he just you know what, don't even concern yourself with them, because Seattle's a dumpster fire right now. Well, not true dumpster fire, but they're heading down. I'm not touching anyone from Seattle except Russell Wilson.
The thing about Seattle really is that you just don't necessarily know when it comes to a tight end like this. They got Jimmy Graham, and everybody expected the world out of that, and it didn't pan out quite as we would have expected and hoped. He's gone, but now they got Brandon Marshall. There's a deep threat right there. That's a guy who, if he stays healthy, he's very smart. He makes free catches, which is great for a guy like Russell Wilson, who wants to throw after running around in the backfield for a long, long time, because that offensive line is awful. He has to make these things happen. So I just have tons of reservations about Nick Vannett, being that, 124 yards last year, 1 touchdown, 32 yards the year before that, his rookie year. Out of 19 targets total in his career.
Yep.
I'm just sitting there going, I need to see something. But he's a guy I might watch.
But last year he caught 80% of his 80% of the balls thrown to him he caught.
Yeah, which is fantastic. But if you only get 15 targets, that doesn't do much for me.
Mark's like, you should be catching 100% at that point.
Yeah. I'm a little worried about the fact that you dropped 3 balls. But anyways, no, it's just, I just don't know out of this one. Sure, there's not a lot of competition for him out there.
Well, I mean, they signed Ed Dickson, who was in Carolina last year.
Yeah.
For me, that's the only thing that's a question mark for Vanett is if he I don't want to say struggle because third year pro, you're not expecting him to really struggle, but if he doesn't click like Seattle fans or the Seattle team expect him to, is there a possibility that Ed Dickson, new free agent who's been in the league since 2010, hey, I had, 437 yards last year, 48 targets with Cam Newton. I'm going to slide right in here and take this number one spot from you.
Yeah, it's certainly possible because, I mean, I think it has the potential of showing that they don't have the highest hopes for Nick Vanett. I mean, it could just be that, hey, more competition is good. We can cut people if we need to cut people. But really what you're kind of looking at is a fear that, are they not into this guy as a receiving option? Are they going to be scared of using that? And it's totally possible. You know, I don't really expect that much out of him this coming season. Maybe pay attention to him for waiver wire, I guess, but I don't know. I just don't. There's not a clear answer for me when it comes to him for getting targets.
And Vanett, to me, he's not a guy I would draft. He's a guy that I would put on my watch. Like, if your league has the watch list, put him on your watch list, see how he does the first 3 weeks or maybe the first 2 weeks, and then make a decision of, hey, you know what? Do I pick this guy up now to basically stash him and use him? Or if it's like, you know what, 4 weeks in and he's kind of a dud, I'm going to click him off that watch list. That's kind of what it is for me. Because for tight ends, like I said, it's a little bit wonky as top 16 is basically, if you're in a 16-man league, those are your starters. Then basically, if I'm doing my math right, up until it would be 32, so all of these next guys would be backups. Maybe 28's a little bit too high, but that's more for me of what I think he'll be at the end of the year.
But there's also the draft strategy of it in the eyes of if you get a solid starting tight end and everybody's drafted their backups in your, let's just say 10, 12-man league, you're number 11, maybe 10, 12 getting your backup tight end, you probably don't have a reason to draft one because there's not going to be a difference between the guy you can pick up on the waiver wire. You might be better off just drafting yet another running back.
Let me put it this way, and I know this is a running back comparison, but the thing I wouldn't want to be is how I was last year with Alvin Kamara. Almost drafted him in the late rounds of our draft, passed on him because, you know what? AP Mark Ingram at the top. If he's good, or no, I did draft him. If you know what, I'm going to stash him. Then I'm like, you know what? AP, Mark Ingram, I'm going to dish him off. I'm getting rid of Kamara. You're not going to be anything. Don't be that guy that's like, you know what? I'm not going to do, I'm high on him, but I'm going to go with a different position because it's too much of a risk. If you like the guy, go ahead and take him later on because don't be like me where I had Alvin Kamara for the first week, dropped him, or week or two, dropped him because I thought that AP and Mark Ingram were the answer, and then I should have kept Alvin Kamara because of what he turned into. Last guy I do want to mention is from that Saints team, though, Ben Watson. Is he a guy, should we expect big things from him just because he's on a team with Drew Brees?
Well, I think it can certainly help, and when he's been on the Saints before, it's kind of been a mixed bag. Here's the thing about Ben Watson, Benjamin Watson, is that he is the definition of inconsistency. He'll have a year where he gets 600. He'll have a year where he gets 200. He's a guy who
He's
drops.
coming off 2 good seasons, though.
Sure.
The last one with Drew Brees, he did have over 800 yards and was targeted 110 times.
He was. That's great. But he also drops the ball a lot.
Yeah, he did only catch 67% of those passes.
So it's one of those he's a risk. He has that boom potential. He's got that great bust potential. So it's really up to you if you trust drafting a, 37-year-old tight end who did have some good years. One good year with Drew Brees and 2 not so good years with Drew Brees. And Not really injury issues. You're not super concerned about that. You know, you miss a game or two every now and then, but overall he's been okay. It's just a gamble to me, but it's the kind of thing where if you want a backup tight end and he's sitting there and it's lower in the draft, yeah, you might be able to stash a good guy.
Here's the thing, though, that you're forgetting. So you look at that 2013 through 2015, he was with New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
What happened between 14 and 15 in New Orleans?
Bountygate?
No, not Bountygate. Who did they get rid of? Sent him to Seattle.
Oh, Jimmy Graham, that's right.
He became the number one guy.
Yep.
Without Jimmy Graham there, not Voltron, but taking all the receptions, that is what I'm looking like. What I see is two, inconsistencies, you could say, but really that 13-14 was, hey, I'm behind Jimmy Graham, and Jimmy Graham's going to get more targets and more passes than I am. Whereas when he was the main guy, he only caught 67% of passes, but for my backup, getting 800 yards, 6 touchdowns, I'll take that. And I see the down in his stats from last year being a Ravens problem, not a Ben Watson problem. So for me, he's in my top 20 for tight ends. I think that Drew Brees elevates him though to that point and being a part of this Saints off. The thing is, Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers are the two quarterbacks I'll say this for, to where when it comes to receivers and tight ends, take their players with a grain of salt because they won't care, I got to get it to this guy. No, they're going to sling the ball all over the field. They're going to get it to the open guy. Drew Brees a little bit more than Aaron Rodgers in that sense, but that's why to me, being the main guy in New Orleans, the next tight end behind him is
Fleener.
Well,
Josh
Kobe
Hill.
Fleener's not there anymore.
Oh, they cut Kobe Fleener?
They cut Kobe Fleener. The ones they have is Garrett Griffin and then Michael Humamana. Basically, he was from New England. Got a Super Bowl with them. I'm not going to butcher his last name like I just tried. But those are their tight ends. So for me, Benjamin Watson's the guy. He's going to get most of the receptions. And they have Thomas and Ginn still, but you got rid of Willie Snead. So it's another wide receiver you got rid of. And I don't think there's another wide receiver. Well, maybe Cam Meredith. Forgot that they got Cam Meredith, but how is he going to come back from that injury? Can he then be the number 3 for them with getting rid of Willie Snead? Any guys in this 21 through 30 you want to mention that we didn't really put a focus on?
Just the last thing on Benjamin Watson is if he can catch the ball, I know this is silly, John Madden-esque, but he's got to catch the ball. Is really what it comes down to. He has had plenty of seasons where he's been around 50-60%.
And last year was his highest at 77.
Yeah.
So, he is coming off his highest, but like you said, there's a lot of 60s. There's a 59 in there. His lowest was when he was with New England. And, he only played in 14 games, but he caught, 47% of passes from Tom Brady. But this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you think of our 21 through 30. Who did we hit on? Who didn't we hit on? Who do you think we should have had in these rankings that we don't have in these rankings? That's where we kind of get that discussion in this part of our rankings.